In the remote and densely forested Kiamichi Mountains of southeastern Oklahoma lies the small, unassuming community of Honobia. This isolated region, characterized by its rugged terrain and vast wilderness, has long been a hotbed for reports of mysterious creatures lurking in the shadows. Among these tales, one stands out, a chilling series of events that unfolded in January 2000, known to locals and enthusiasts as the Siege at Honobia. Picture a secluded homestead, miles away from the nearest neighbor, enveloped by the dense canopy of ancient trees. For 2 years, the family residing here experienced unsettling disturbances during the dead of night. It began subtly, strange noises echoing from the woods, shadows glimpsed from the corner of the eye, and the inexplicable disappearance of deer meat stored in their outdoor shed. The air was often thick with an unbearable stench, described as a nauseating blend of musky urine and burnt hair, seeping through the walls and permeating their senses. As time passed, these nocturnal intrusions escalated. The unseen visitor grew bolder, approaching the house under the cloak of darkness. The family would lie awake, hearts pounding, as they heard heavy footsteps thudding on their porch, windows rattling as if something, or someone, was attempting to force entry, and the ominous jiggle of door handles in the dead of night. The creature's audacity reached a terrifying peak when it began tearing away at the wooden window frames, as if determined to gain access to the sanctuary within. In a desperate bid to protect his loved ones, the father armed himself and confronted the intruder. One fateful night, he stepped into the cold abyss of his yard and came face to face with a massive, hairy figure standing upright. Its eyes glowed with an otherworldly intensity, and its presence exuded an air of primal menace. Acting on instinct and fear, he raised his rifle and fired. The creature let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the valleys as it retreated into the inky blackness of the forest. The following morning, a trail of blood led from the yard into the dense woods, but the creature was nowhere to be found. Terrified and at a loss for what to do, the family reached out for help. Their plea caught the attention of the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, BFRO, which promptly dispatched a team to investigate. Upon arrival, the investigators were struck by the palpable fear etched on the faces of the family members. The accounts they provided were harrowing, guttural vocalizations echoing from the hills, the oppressive odor lingering in the air, and the relentless attempts to breach their home. Physical evidence further corroborated their claims. A recently killed deer with no bullet wounds, its internal organs grotesquely removed through a small opening near its neck, as if by some powerful, inhuman hand. The BFRO team, seasoned in such investigations, found themselves unnerved by the intensity of the activity. They documented large, unidentifiable footprints in the vicinity and recorded the eerie nocturnal sounds that pervaded the area. Despite their efforts, the elusive creature remained unseen during their watch, its presence felt, but not witnessed. In the aftermath, the family took decisive action. They removed all remaining deer meat and ceased hunting activities on their property, aiming to eliminate the attractant that had possibly drawn the creature to their home. Gradually, the disturbances waned. The oppressive atmosphere lifted, and the nocturnal assaults ceased. The family could finally sleep without the paralyzing fear of an imminent intrusion. The events at Honobia have since become a cornerstone in the annals of cryptid encounters, fueling debates and discussions among skeptics and believers alike. The annual Honobia Bigfoot Festival now stands as a testament to this enduring mystery, drawing enthusiasts from all corners to the heart of Oklahoma's wilderness, where the line between myth and reality blurs. As we look deeper into this haunting tale, we will explore the first-hand accounts, the evidence gathered, and the lingering questions that continue to haunt those who dare to venture into the shadowy depths of the unknown. Join me as we unravel the chilling narrative of the siege at Honobia. These events took place at a rural homestead outside Honobia, Oklahoma, in January 2000. Some members of the BFRO, Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, visited the family and stayed overnight. They found the situation compelling. A few weeks later, Oklahoma television stations and newspapers mentioned the incidents but never told the full story. In mid-January, the BFRO received a message from the uncle of the Honobia family. There are too many incidents to list here. Please have someone contact us. This is no hoax, and my brother is afraid for his family. The creature is getting bolder each time it returns. It's huge, walks upright, and smells like musky urine and burnt hair. It keeps coming back in the early morning hours and harasses them until just before dawn. On more than one occasion, it has tried to enter their home. Everyone thinks we're crazy when we mention it. Please, we don't know what to do. Something needs to be done. We have stories that would make the hair stand on your neck. The message explained that for the past 2 years, the family had been dealing with large nuisance animals prowling outside at night, stealing deer meat from an outdoor shed. Things escalated when these creatures began trying to enter the home. One night, the father stepped outside, got a good look at one, and fired a shot at what he believed was a Bigfoot as it ran back into the woods. After receiving the report, the BFRO contacted the family. The first person they spoke to was the brother of the father. He insisted they weren't making anything up. At least one Bigfoot had been coming around the homestead almost every night, messing with a window, wiggling the door handle as if trying to enter, and even stealing deer meat from a freezer in an open-sided outbuilding. The family could hear chattering and screaming from the hills when the prowler was nearby. The wife, too frightened to stay, took the children and left. The men armed themselves with assault rifles, prepared to defend their home. On the night before the first BFRO message, the father fired at one of the creatures and thought he had hit it. The next morning, he found a trail of blood in the yard, believing it came from the animal he shot. One BFRO investigator, an airline pilot from Ohio, offered to visit the scene to collect blood samples. Another investigator contacted the family by phone and updated other BFRO members via email. I finally spoke with the shooter last night. When I spoke with him directly, I got the facts straight about the situation at the house and the blood. The shooter is named Tim. His brother, the one who originally contacted us, is named Michael. Tim says it was definitely a Bigfoot that he shot at and thought he might have hit it. It was approximately 70 yards away at night. There is a trail of blood in the woods, but it leads to the fresh deer kill, not away from the area where the Bigfoot was standing when he fired at it. Tim says the Bigfoot ran after he shot at it, but then he and his brother could hear it and others on the hillside for several hours after the shooting. That suggests to me that he did not even wound it, and all the blood is from the deer. Miles and Roger will be there in a few hours and see this all for themselves and thoroughly look over the area. They will be armed. Roger's father, a very skilled 72-year-old bear hunter, will remain at the property, possibly for a few days. Tim says he does not care what we do there, but if the animal comes back to the house and scratches at the window again, he will go out and try to kill it. He has had to send his kids to stay with relatives, and he and his wife are clearly terrified. Matt. The BFRO members debated whether there was a way to deal with the creatures without resorting to lethal force. However, Tim and Michael were adamant that they would shoot on sight. To them, these creatures were a dangerous nuisance, and they did not care if researchers had a problem with that. Even if a team with tranquilizer darts could be assembled, it would not be safe for them to be on the property, while the residents were shooting at anything they believed to be Bigfoot. Tim and Michael made it clear that nothing would stop them from firing if they saw something suspicious from their porch. When trying to understand why these creatures were frequenting the property and attempting to break into the house, the BFRO investigators concluded that it was all about food. The creatures were after the deer and the stored deer meat. Tim had been planting Austrian snow peas all over his property to attract deer for hunting, and as a result, many deer were gathering there. It was a reliable food source, not just for Tim, but also for any predators in the area. The BFRO team suggested that the family should take measures to alter the creature's behavior in a non-lethal way. The best course of action was to deter the deer from coming to the property, which would, in turn, force the Bigfoots to look elsewhere for food. Tim was advised to remove the snow peas, put up scarecrows, and string up more lights around the house. After examining the situation, it became clear that the family's actions had contributed to the crisis. If fresh game was regularly available around their property, it was bound to attract unwanted visitors. Tim and Michael understood the logic but remained firm in their stance. If they saw one of the creatures, they would shoot it. They had no intention of moving or selling the property, and they believed they had the right to defend their home by any means necessary. The investigation revealed that the creature's aggressive behavior was directly linked to the presence of deer. Once the food source was removed, the problem naturally resolved itself. Over time, the family reported fewer disturbances. Eventually, they heard no more vocalizations from the hills, and the creatures seemed to have moved on. Several months later, the BFRO sent another investigator to camp in the area. Though a few unusual signs were found, there was no definitive evidence. The family continued to live on the property without further encounters. This case remained one of the most remarkable and unsettling encounters documented by the BFRO. Bigfoot Sightings and Encounters in Anderson County. Compiled by Philip Spencer, Bigfoot researcher. This is a collection of Bigfoot sightings and encounters that I have gathered over the years. These reports show just how active Anderson County has been in terms of Bigfoot activity. Man finds huge footprint, 2007. To protect his identity, we will refer to the witness as the ex-farmer. In 2007, on a farm along Harry Wise Road in Anderson County, Kentucky, a farmer and his wife were sitting on their porch, unwinding after a long day. As his wife went inside to bed, the ex-farmer remained in his rocking chair, listening to the sounds of the night: crickets chirping, an occasional bird call, a distant dog barking, and the faint hum of a passing vehicle. Then suddenly, the night fell eerily silent. He sat up, listening closely. That's when he heard something moving in the creek, about 150 feet from his porch. Large limbs snapped under the weight of something heavy. It wasn't just the breaking of twigs. This was something substantial. Then he heard deep, heavy breathing. It wasn't labored, but it was unmistakably deep and unlike any animal he had ever encountered. The sounds continued down the creek and eventually faded into the distance. Feeling uneasy, he went inside, grabbed his shotgun, and returned to the porch. Though he was certain the creature had left, he stood in the dark for a while, watching and listening, before going to bed. The next morning, after finishing his chores, he went straight to the creek where he had heard the sounds. The damp ground had captured a few tracks. Excited, he hurried back to his house and called me. When I asked if he had marked the spot, he admitted he had been too excited and forgot, but was confident he could find it again. I instructed him to take a camera, a measuring device, and anything he could use to make a cast of the track. However, when he returned, the most distinct print was gone. Still, he managed to photograph two remaining tracks. One footprint, clearly a right foot, measured approximately 20 inches long from heel to toe. Unfortunately, the muddy ground was covered in leaves, making the imprint less distinct than we had hoped. To help visualize what he saw, I asked him to draw an outline of the track and overlay it onto the photograph. One unusual detail stood out. The large toe appeared exaggerated in size. He speculated that the creature may have slipped, pressing its toe into the mud, creating an elongated impression. The arch of the foot also suggested the creature had been leaning forward when it made the track. Regardless of the slight distortions, one fact was clear. This was an enormous footprint. My 1970 Bigfoot sighting. The landscape where I grew up was breathtaking. Rolling valleys, dense woodlands, and winding rivers and creeks. My friend and I loved exploring the outdoors and often went on nighttime drives, shining a high-powered spotlight across open fields to observe deer and other wildlife. One night, we were driving along a 2-lane road near Glenboro, Kentucky, where a small river flowed beside open, lush bottomlands, ideal for spotting wildlife. As we drove up an incline, I aimed the spotlight down into a large clearing where the river curved westward. This was one of the best spots to see animals. As I scanned the valley, something caught my eye. At first, it was difficult to make out, but as I kept the light on it, the figure turned to face us, and that's when we saw them. Two huge, glowing, reddish-orange eyes, standing far taller than any of the deer nearby. Shocked, my friend stopped the car. We turned around, pulled over, and adjusted our position for a better view. When I swept the spotlight across the valley again, I saw the dark figure moving, walking briskly on two legs. As it moved, it turned its head toward us multiple times, giving us another glimpse of its glowing eyes. It became clear that this was no deer, no bear, and certainly no human. The creature stood between 8 to 10 feet tall, massive and bulky. My friend and I were both experienced outdoorsmen, and we had never seen anything like this. It walked smoothly and stepped over a 3 to 4 foot fence without breaking stride, eventually disappearing into the night. Years later, in the same area, I had another unsettling experience. While walking along River Road to go fishing, I suddenly heard a loud crashing sound from the hillside. A large doe came barreling down the hill, leaped across the road, and vanished into the field. I stood frozen, wondering what had scared the deer so badly. Then I heard footsteps. Unlike the sound of a four-legged animal, these were heavy, deliberate steps, something large walking on 2 legs. Whatever it was moving toward me. Unnerved, I quickly walked toward an open area, hoping to get a clear look. When I arrived, I saw a freshly moved log on the hillside, a log that had been embedded in the ground for years. Whatever had stepped on it had enough weight to dislodge it. Though I never saw the creature that day, I believe it was the same being I had encountered in the valley years earlier. Siblings see Bigfoot sitting on a log. A brother and sister were walking down a familiar path behind their home on Harry Wise Road, Anderson County, Kentucky, when they froze in their tracks. Sitting on a log ahead of them was a Bigfoot. The creature turned its head, looked at them, then calmly stood up and walked away. The sighting left a deep impact on the siblings, so much so that one of them refuses to speak about it to this day. Bigfoot spotted walking along a ridge, 1970s. Bruce Young and a friend were cruising down Hammond Creek Road in Anderson County one late afternoon, enjoying the drive and talking about cars, hunting, and life. As they rode along, Bruce glanced up at a nearby hill and saw something moving along the ridge. He immediately stopped the car, jumped out, and stared in shock. A massive, hairy, man-like figure, at least 7 feet tall, was walking along the ridgeline. Though it was just after sunset, there was still enough light to clearly see the creature's size and movement. It walked with an easy, confident gait, covered in long, dark brown hair. As Bruce watched, goosebumps covered his entire body. He knew this was something extraordinary. After that day, his perception of nature and life was forever changed. Elderly couple sees large creature, late 1990s. An elderly couple who had lived on Harry Wise Road for over 50 years had an unforgettable sighting one afternoon. While in the kitchen, the wife noticed something moving along the tree line in the backfield. She called her husband, an experienced outdoorsman and hunter, to take a look. The man watched closely as a massive figure walked along the tree line, then disappeared into the woods. When telling the story, he insisted it was a bear walking on its hind legs, yet he also admitted it was bigger than any bear he had ever seen. His eyes carried a look of wonder and doubt, as if he was struggling to believe his own explanation. Father and children encounter Bigfoot on Harry Wise Road, 2006. A man who wished to remain anonymous shared his experience with me via email. His report is also publicly available online, so I will respect his privacy while recounting his story here. This man has had multiple sightings of what he believes to be a Bigfoot, along with hearing strange sounds he associates with the creature. In his own words, "It was a warm summer day in 2006. My kids and I were fishing in a small pool off a creek on Harry Wise Road. Suddenly, something stepped out of the tree line, about 25 feet away. At first, I thought it was a large man wearing brown Carhartt coveralls. The whole encounter lasted less than a minute. It just stood there, staring at us. I glanced at my daughter. She was pale as a ghost. She had seen it too. When I turned back, it was gone. It had slipped back into the trees just as silently as it had appeared. This wasn't my first sighting. I saw something similar back in the summer of 1990, but I dismissed it, thinking my mind was playing tricks on me. Then, 2 years ago, I saw it again in a tree line. All of my sightings have been near the same location, close to a set of 3 red dots. Other members of my family have also heard strange howls, unlike anything we can explain. We've even found trees scratched up as high as 7 feet, as if something was dulling its claws. There was a peak of strange activity in the late 1980s when sightings were frequent, but after some people moved out of Bailey's Run, the activity seemed to stop. Coincidence? Maybe, but I know what I saw. Bigfoot in the Trees, 1970s. On December 5, 2010, I had a 45-minute phone interview with Tammy Mercer, who had lived in Lawrenceburg, Kentucky in Anderson County. She shared 3 separate encounters that had a profound impact on her life. Even decades later, as we spoke, I could hear fear in her voice. She admitted that to this day, she avoids looking out of windows at night and refuses to go outside alone in the dark. Her first experience took place in the late 1970s when she and some friends were playing outside at a trailer park on the east side of Lawrenceburg. It was cold, near winter. As they played, Tammy glanced toward the tree line in the distance and noticed what she thought was a strange-looking tree. Jokingly, she said, "That tree is coming for us." But then, to everyone's horror, it actually moved. The large, hairy creature started coming toward them. Panic set in. The children screamed and ran. Tammy, convinced the creature was chasing them, sprinted inside and hid in her trailer. One unusual detail she noted was its gray color, noticeably different from the typical dark brown or black often reported. She also recalled seeing something moving in the same area on foggy mornings, though she could never confirm what it was. The sighting occurred on US 62, east of Lawrenceburg, in late November or early December. Chased by Bigfoot, early 1980s. In 1982 or 1983, Tammy and a friend were walking near Wildcat Road in Anderson County, Kentucky. They were teenagers, just exploring, talking, and taking turns shooting a .22 caliber rifle as they wandered along a frozen creek. As they reached a point where hills rose on both sides of them, they stopped at a barbed wire fence. Tammy climbed over first and turned to help her friend. That's when she heard something heavy moving on the hillside. The hillside was steep, a mix of rock and dirt, and the sound was distinct. Something large was up there. She looked up, and what she saw froze her in place. She couldn't process what she was seeing. Her brain raced. Was that a man? A bear? But deep down, she knew it was neither. A massive, bipedal, long-haired creature was standing on the hill, seemingly occupied with something. It was making noise, doing something, until Tammy's shocked outburst. "Oh shit! What is that?" The creature turned and looked directly at them. The girls ran as fast as they could. Then, to their horror, the creature began chasing them. Branches snapped. Heavy footsteps thundered behind them. Tammy said it was gaining on them way too fast, far quicker than something that size should be able to move. They didn't stop running until they burst into a clearing. The second they hit open ground, the creature stopped. It didn't follow them further. Tammy never looked back. She just ran. She described the creature as dark in color, massive, and covered in long hair that looked unusual but wasn't matted. The event took place in the winter, during the afternoon. What troubled Tammy the most was how completely focused the creature was on whatever it had been doing before it noticed them. Even gunshots, laughter, and conversation hadn't disturbed it. But the moment she spoke, it reacted instantly. A strange creature in the night, mid-1980s. In the mid-1980s, Tammy was visiting her step-grandparents near the Mercer-Anderson County line. For several nights, her grandfather's dogs had been unusually restless, barking and acting disturbed by something outside. One night, while visiting, Tammy heard something at the window. Assuming it was her grandfather playing a prank, she walked over, grabbed the curtains, and yanked them open. What she saw made her blood run cold. A huge, hairy creature was staring in through the window. But something was wrong. It had no nose, no mouth, just eyes. She panicked and ran. Meanwhile, her step-grandfather was outside at the same time. Something happened to him involving a light. When he came back inside, he was dazed, confused, and mumbling. Even more disturbing, he had no memory of what happened. This event took place very close to Christmas, yet for the rest of his life, he could never remember that Christmas at all. Something had happened, and he had lost time. Tammy remains deeply troubled by this experience. Though the creature resembled the two Sasquatch-like beings she had seen before, its hair seemed different, and its facial features, or lack thereof, disturbed her the most. Even decades later, she frequently reflects on these encounters, wondering why she was chosen to experience them, and what might have happened if the creature had caught them that day on the hillside. All three of her encounters took place in the winter, between November and January. The Varmint of Adair County, Dave's Encounter, 2008. After years of hearing strange stories, unusual sounds, and even discovering an odd footprint on my family's farm near a known sighting area, I decided to start looking into Bigfoot reports in the region seriously. In August of 2008, I came across a sighting report from Adair County, specifically near the concrete bridge on Highway 551 that crosses Green River Lake, just 10 miles from our property. Curious, I decided to visit the area for the first time in early September. The spot where the Bigfoot was reportedly seen corresponded to an old gravel pull-off, long used by locals for fishing access. Unfortunately, it had also become a dumping ground, littered with trash, tree limbs, and even animal remains. When I stepped out of my car, I quickly realized the area was practically a bone bed. Scattered across the ground were small animal bones, along with larger deer remains, most likely roadkill, partial hunting discards, or taxidermy leftovers. Many deer skeletons were stripped clean, their heads missing. With so much easily available food and a direct path to the lake, it became clear why a large predator, or something else, would return to this spot regularly. On Saturday, September 27th, my family was preparing for 2 family reunions the next day. I left my wife and daughter at our farm and decided to check out the bridge area again. I brought along a cheap trail camera I had purchased that summer for photographing wildlife on our property. After spending a quiet afternoon at the lakeshore, I strapped the camera to a tree halfway down the path, hoping to capture anything that passed by overnight. As sunset approached, I set up the camera and left, confident that few people visited the area after dark. Early Sunday morning at 7:30 a.m., I returned to collect the camera. The entire area was shrouded in dense fog, probably the thickest I had ever seen in Adair County. The lake was completely invisible. I quickly retrieved the camera and noticed it had been triggered 3 or 4 times, making me eager to check the footage. As I headed back up the bluff, I heard movement. Something was pacing me from a deep gully, about 40 feet to my left. At first, I wasn't concerned. I had visited this spot before without any encounters. Meanwhile, I could faintly hear 2 men talking and laughing on a boat below. Then I stopped. The footsteps stopped too. Moments later, they resumed, moving toward the lake, in the same direction as the voices. When I reached the top of the turnaround, the noise stopped entirely. As I placed the camera in the back of my Honda Element, I noticed an overpowering smell, like a wet dog. Strangely, when I stepped away, the odor nearly disappeared. A light breeze was coming from my right, so I stepped back toward the smell. That's when I saw it. Just 80 feet away, standing in the tree line near the bridge, a figure suddenly stood upright. At first, it looked headless, just a massive, hulking form with broad shoulders. Then I realized that the dark shape between its shoulders was actually its face, tilted downward in a low, aggressive stance. I believe the slamming of my car's rear hatch startled it. Perhaps it thought I was about to drive away, and it had been watching me all along. For a few moments it didn't move. Then it swayed slightly from side to side, almost as if bobbing up and down, still intently watching me. Something about its posture and behavior made me think I was looking at an older individual. Its chest and neck were grayish white, while the arms and body were a honey brown color with a reddish tinge. Its shoulders were massive, and its arms hung low. Then, from the lake below, I heard the men laugh again. And that's when the creature bellowed. It was a deep, deafening roar, like an enraged bull, and it began moving toward me. As the smell of rotting meat filled the air, an overwhelming wave of anxiety hit me. I instinctively moved toward my car. Then the creature spoke. I can't explain it any other way. It let out a low, rumbling vocalization that sounded like scolding. That's exactly how I felt, like I was being reprimanded, like I had intruded where I wasn't welcome. For a few moments, I was so disoriented that I had a sudden, irrational urge to sit down on the ground, almost as if my body was shutting down in fear. But I fought it off and climbed into the car. The creature hadn't moved since I stepped out of view behind the vehicle. I reached for my .357 Taurus revolver, which I usually carry for protection against coyotes and black bears, both becoming more common in the area. I aimed toward the ground and fired 2 warning shots. The creature's reaction stunned me. It didn't run. It didn't panic. It simply stopped moving, standing just 30 feet away. Realizing I needed to leave, I shifted into drive. But in my panic, I accidentally fired another round, this time straight into my car's center console. The explosion inside the metal interior of the Honda nearly deafened me. I tore out of there at full speed, realizing too late that my car's electrical system was damaged. The windows wouldn't roll up, and when I got back to the farm, the wiring harness had completely fallen apart. A couple of weeks later, I returned to the site with others and used a paint pole to estimate the creature's height, approximately 7.5 feet tall. Its chest was grayish-white, with dark eyes and a flattened, almost human-like nose. Its arms were massive, with long reddish-brown hair covering its body. The hair on its head was thinner, almost like it was slightly balding, and no ears were visible. Dave, a local investigator, spent countless hours trying to perfect a computer-generated sketch of the creature. There have been so many sightings in the area that locals have given it a nickname: the Varmint. The 1963 window sighting. In the summer of 1963, a young boy in Adair County saw a large, hairy creature peering into his bedroom window. A 63-year-old woman sighting, May 2011. On a routine drive home from the Adair County Animal Hospital, Sharon, a longtime animal rescuer, saw a Bigfoot cross the road near Green River. It looked like a big man, but covered in hair, she recalled. It crossed the road, stopped in the middle, and stared directly at her before disappearing into the woods. When she later told a friend, she was shocked to hear that her friend's uncle had seen the same creature in that exact area. Every word of her story remains 100% true. This is just a small selection of the many encounters reported in Anderson County. Whether you believe in Bigfoot or not, these stories share one thing in common: ordinary people encountering something extraordinary, something they cannot explain.